All right, I think we have a quorum. So, Sri, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Stefan. So first of all, thanks to BayesiaLab for coming to RTP. This has been my home for 25 plus years now, and usually I have to go somewhere to attend this conference. I'm always happy to have something right here. And thanks to everyone for coming here. Hopefully you guys had 2 good days here. It is Friday afternoon. I do realize post-lunch session, too many sweet options out there. But hopefully this will not be very long. And this is the start of our journey. And since this conference was right here, I wrote to Stefan saying that, hey, we are on the start of something I would like to share. And he said, sure. And here we are. So let me spend a couple of minutes here. So my name is Sri. I work as and the analytics team's manager in the marketing group inside Cisco. And Cisco has a pretty huge campus right here, about 6,000 people working here. And of course, its main headquarters is in San Jose. But this work, I was assisted by Shulin Peng, who was one of the data scientists on our team. But she's out in San Jose, so there was, so I said, okay, I'll cover. She doesn't have to fly over to come and give this talk. So again, the work itself is fairly straightforward. Things are fairly simple, but that's how I like it. I like things to be super simple, explainable. I think that comment was made earlier. Otherwise, no one will adopt it. And somehow in Cisco marketing, and previously I have assisted IBM marketing as well, tends to be a high verify culture. You may not think that the marketing organizations, which tend to be more on the creative side, have a high verify culture. But they do. Folks want to understand, if you're making a recommendation, why should I show this to our customers? Why should I present this particular ad? So in that high verify culture, you have to be able to explain. You have to explain what it is that you are doing, how did you get there, and so forth. So parts of Bayesian networks are helpful in that. I also stick with the simplest algorithm that will solve the problem. And so for that reason, most of the work has been very incrementally developed. But as the maturity of the organization has grown, so I've been at Cisco for 5 years now, I've seen maturity of the organization grow. They are ready to take on more complex algorithms and deal with it and say, yes, okay, we do get it. We do get what you're trying to say. So with that sort of background, so this is Cisco. Most of you may have heard the name of Cisco. Cisco is a networking equipment company. So it's a fairly large company, 74,000 direct employees working across much of the globe. If some of you are paying attention to news about Huawei and the US government coming into, to fisticuffs almost. So that also reflects where Cisco dominates and where Huawei dominates. Huawei dominates on many Asian countries. Cisco dominates in US and good parts of Western Europe and so forth. So there is that. And then, of course, it's a valuable brand. All marketers pay attention to that always. So that's why I put that up there. It's about number 15 in the valuable brand list. But it was also named as #1 great place to work. It's a decent place. So, it's all right. Now, of course, more importantly, if you're using your smartphones or internet ever, and you are on the Western hemisphere of the world, it's almost always going through some Cisco equipment. That's almost a guarantee. So that's the level of market dominance that Cisco has on this side. On the other side, I might say Huawei equipment might be carrying some of our data packets. So with that said, the problem that we are talking about, right? And so it all starts with basic economics. When we talk about what is demand, and the basic definition is you have customers who are willing and able to purchase, and that's very important. That is, they are to be both willing and able, right? That means they have to have the money to purchase. And then goods and services, that means you have something useful to sell, and then in a given period of time. Now, for a marketer, all of these factors are super critical. Who are your customers? Not the whole world. You can't just say, everybody is my customer. That won't fly anywhere. Willing and able. Are you able to say that your customer has money to spend? Can you say that? Can your model say that? It's not straightforward. There's a lot of complex work that goes on behind that to even ascertain, does your customer have money to buy? And you are very reliant on third-party data for getting to those kinds of decisions and those kinds of output. Goods and services, well, of course, the fact that you are in business means there is something going on. You have something useful to say. And then in a given period of time. Now that's very, very critical because timing is everything. Customers will have projects that you need to act upon in a certain time. Now, one thing is important to mention here, Cisco is primarily a B2B company and not a B2C company. So Cisco sells to other businesses. That's its primary method. There are very few end consumer products that Cisco as a company makes. So most of our challenges are in that B2B world. That is, we are trying to sell to other businesses. So with that in mind, let me just walk through this piece a little bit. It will get a little bit deeper into what we are talking about, which is all about demand and buying groups. So when we talk about demand, you have demand at various levels. Now, this came from Serious Decisions, which is a company that specializes in B2B marketing. It's a consulting company. But it's something that we use internally as well. So target demand is simply all the customers whom you think might be interested in your products and services and have the money to actually buy your products and services, what is often called as the addressable market. Then you have the active demand. This is where you get a sense that some percentage of your target customers are actually doing some research or trying to figure out that they want to buy something. So that is active demand. Engaged demand is when somebody is actually responding to your marketing stimuli. That is, so you have sent out an email, you have put out Google ads, you've done something, and they're actually responding to it. So if they're responding to it, then that starts to become a little bit more engaged demand. You start saying, they're at least engaging with us. They are talking to us, doing something. And then after that, it's prioritized demand when you know that, okay, they are showing a lot of interest, there's back and forth, they're attending your webinars, coming to your events. So it starts to get more serious. Qualified demand is you have actually spoken to them. And now you know there is an active project, they have money, they have an interest, and on and on. Then you basically at that stage, from marketing, it goes into the hands of sellers who are now trying to actively work on that opportunity. They call that as pipeline until the sale is made. Right? So that's your typical funnel. These funnels keep evolving, every decade, 15 years, somebody will come with something brand new. They'll say, use this. Or they'll say, that works for me, or something else works for me. So anyway, so right now we are on this. It's a reasonable funnel. It works out. We have our ways of working on that. So what does that have to do with our work? What it has to do is this notion of demand units. So demand units, and I will just take an example. Many of you here may have purchased BayesiaLab from Lionel and Stefan and the BayesiaLab company. And usually, even somewhat dependent on price, you may not be just looking at your own need. You'll say, okay, I may be able to use BayesiaLab, but maybe this other person on my team or in the organization may also be able to use BayesiaLab. And maybe it's 2 or 3 people who come together and make a decision around a product. Now, the more expensive this gets, once you are in the $1 million range, once you are in the $2 million range, once you are spending a lot of money, almost surely it's not a single person making a decision. There is a small group, what we call as the buying group. This buying group is the one that's actually making the decision on purchase. So a demand unit for us is that buying group that has needs, and then they're looking for a solution that will meet that need. So this notion of a buying group is actually quite critical because all members of that buying group are important and they need to be served in their own ways. Some may be looking at the legal aspects. Some may be looking at the functional aspect. Some may look at security, privacy aspects. So you have 4 or 5 different angles that are usually covered. And this is typical, I know, when we as a marketing organization in Cisco, we work with a lot of vendors. When we are buying, there's always a group. It's almost never you never send a single person to make $1 million decision. You never do that, right? So you're always looking for a group of people so that there are multiple people raising all sorts of concerns, asking questions, and so forth. So the identification of these buying groups is what we are after. So in a given customer group, how do you begin to identify them? Because they're not going to tell you. They're not coming and saying, hey, look, we are the 5 people, we are key, these are our needs, and so on. No, most of the customers try to be anonymous a lot of time doing their research. They don't even engage with the brand with whom they're going to make the purchase. They're out there attending conferences like these, or they're out there reading other reports and on and on. So that's the journey that we are on, trying to identify these buying groups who are interested in very specific technologies of interest to us. So in that process, so the challenge is, how do you identify them? Right now, when you think about customers, and especially when we think about customers are engaging both with Cisco as well as with non-Cisco spaces across many, many channels. Just across Cisco, you have Cisco-hosted conferences. These are pretty massive conferences that they tend to come. They're engaging with you on social media all the time. Of course, we are pushing out TV ads all the time. They are visiting Cisco.com. They are, Cisco is sponsoring, for example, the Tokyo Olympics that's coming up next year. So there are a bunch of customers whom Cisco ends up sending there. So there are all these channels, all these various places where we're engaging with a lot of customers. So question is, from that group, how do you come to this place where you start to say, oh, this subset is the buying group, or this subset is the one that is very interesting for that particular company, right? So so that becomes a pretty big challenge. And so just to talk about those challenges a little bit more, a lot of the engagement is anonymous. So people may come to your website, or they are engaging on social handles, but on the social handle, they may not reveal who they are. They may be hitting on a click to chat, talk to an agent. They don't necessarily say, oh, I am from so-and-so company. You can ask them. They may say that. They may not say that. When they are on, people frequently clear cookies. They don't necessarily show up on your website with this clear thing saying, oh, I am from so-and-so company. No, they're just coming there, checking a few things out, and then they're leaving. So there is a lot of anonymity that you have to deal with. Even when you do have contacts, sometimes you have contacts, you have the name of the person, but you don't have their company. And so you get a gap there. You may know the company, you may not know exactly what technology they are interested in. I mean, you may have some idea, but you don't exactly know what is it do they want to buy. And the larger the company, especially at Cisco, it's a huge problem, because Cisco has a pretty large portfolio of products. And even when you divide them into some suitable categories, you end up with 7, 8, 9 different major groups. And to know which particular product is a customer interested in becomes a bit of a challenge. So you may have contacts, you may not know company. You may know company, you don't have the contact. Or you may have both of those, but you do not know which area are they interested in. And at the end of the day, even if you have all of that, you still do not know what their role is. You do not know who's the decision maker, who's more interested in legal material, and so forth. So there are different kinds of challenges. Now, these can all be addressed slowly, and that's the journey again that we are on. So what we did as a first step, and this is obviously critical, we take data for granted, but getting this kind of data together, this has been a massive, massive effort. So in fact, from the time when I was here presenting, talking about some of our customer engagement work, what we have done over the last 3 years was actually begin to integrate all this data coming from all these different channels of engagement into one interconnected, threaded data set. So that we have an internal customer ID that we maintain so that we can identify those customers. And then you have the individual customer handles. So this particular customer shows up on email with this email ID and shows up on social like this. shows up at an event like this, and so forth. So you need that internal story that is then threaded across all the channels so that you can connect the dots. Now, are we all the way there? No, we are not. I mean, there are a few more puzzle pieces that need to be filled out before the picture becomes fully clear, but we are considerably farther along. And that has helped us. That has helped us because once you know all the different ways in which a customer is beginning to engage with you, you can then begin to do something with it. You can then begin to look at their behavior, you can look at their frequency of engagement, and so forth. Okay? Now, anytime you're faced with anonymous audience and so forth, it's always useful to rely on behavior, right? So behavior is the one thing that you can say, look, let's look at what they do and not just what they are saying or not saying and so forth. So what they do becomes critical. And you can look at many things. Online, you can see what pages are they at, what content are they consuming, and then how frequently are they coming. In events, you can look at what demos and demonstrations they are paying attention to, what sessions are they paying attention to, and so forth. So this can be a pretty big space because they are engaging with you in a variety of different ways. And once you get a sense for the kind of behavior that they are exhibiting, you can then begin to make some sense of it. You can then begin to say, this is the kind of behavior that they are exhibiting, and maybe that implies they are part of this type of buying group that's interested in this kind of technology, and so forth. Okay, so that's the journey that we have just started. So what I will walk you through over the next few slides is the very specific example, the very specific, for instance, where we have begun to dig deeper. All right, so the focus is here is on internet service providers. And I picked this example because, number one, they are a very significant part of Cisco's customers, and they are a very big part of all of your lives. What do I mean by service providers? Are companies like Verizon, Sprint, British Telecom, Virgin Mobile, etc. That is, all our internet services are provided by some service provider. They are all huge customers of Cisco, super, super important to a company like Cisco. Now, there are two aspects to a service provider, and that's why I picked this example and picked this also for our analysis. These are large companies. So let's just pick Verizon as an example. It's a big company. So like any other large company, let's like ExxonMobil or any other large company, they have a large campus, a number of employees, and you need to provide internet services. You need to provide network connectivity to all of these employees so that they can message each other, send emails, and all of that stuff. That is, they need the corporate network, right? So they can buy those types of products from Cisco because Cisco sells those kinds of products just for creating the corporate networks. But these companies are also providing mobile data service and internet service to all of us. We are all consumers of either Verizon or Sprint or British Telecom or some service provider through whom we get our services. And those need specialized equipment because those have very different characteristics than your typical corporate office connectivity networks. And Cisco sells that kind of equipment as well. And we call those as service provider products, just for simplicity. SP products or service provider products. So those are the ones that go into the massive infrastructure that they have for providing internet services. Now, one of the challenges that we have from our service providers is who from the service providers are interested in SP products versus who are interested in your typical corporate network connectivity products. Right? So think of these as two different product categories, but the customer is coming from the same place. So it's the same company that is interested in two different types of products that Cisco sells. And one of the challenges that the marketing team has had is, I do not know who is who. So we were taking the spray and pray approach. Just send emails to everybody we know in that company or put Google ads in front of all those people. Oh, you belong to Verizon? You're going to get that ad. And that ad, of course, is going to follow you wherever you go through all the retargeting, et cetera, et cetera. So those things become a challenge. When you do a spray and pray approach, of course, the results are always middling sort of results. And so what they were, so the basic question they were asking us is, so how can you help isolate those contacts from these companies who are only interested in SP products, not the typical corporate network, but the SP products, the stuff that goes into mobile data networks and so forth. So we said, okay, should not be too hard. Of course, before we could say that, it took 3 years of effort to get all the data together, because only if you get the data together, then you can begin to say something about it. And our approach was, okay, yes, we know we have all sorts of challenges, but you always start small. You start small, start providing some results and so forth. So we took the list of target companies. So we said, okay, here's the universe of service provider companies that Cisco is interested in. And we started with known contacts. That is, whom all do we know from these companies? Now, contacts themselves present their own challenges, and it's a simple case of people change companies, things happen, contacts get stale, etc., etc. Nevertheless, you do the best you can. You start with the known contacts. You try to see how fresh these contacts are. Use their channel-specific identifier. Once you get to that stage, what we then did, we actually looked across multiple channels, but the example I'm giving you right now will be very specific to just the web behavior, just the web part of it. But we have done the same exercise, expanding it to events and social media, etc. But the web one is easy to follow. So now that you have known contacts from a set of companies that you are interested in, clustering is a natural solution. You say, hey, I can look at their behavior and I can cluster and see if using clustering, I can separate them out, parse them out into different groups. And can I somehow get to that SP buyer group, to that group of people who are interested in SP products merely by looking at web browsing? And of course, repeat that exercise across multiple channels, since we do have all of those different dimensions as well. So this was fairly straightforward. So we looked at the web browsing from these targeted accounts that covers about fiscal year 2019, about 3/4 of data. It covered about 69% of the accounts, and that itself actually began to ring bells. That why is it covering only 69% of the targeted accounts, when typically online you should be seeing more like 90% of these accounts should be spending time on our site. But if they're not, that itself is a risk factor. So you start thinking about that. That came to around 90,000 contacts, which is, we deal with millions. Where in cookies, it's actually 5.8 million cookies, many of them anonymous. So there are about 8 million visitors who come every month to Cisco.com website. So it's a very small number for us when we look at 90,000 contacts. But okay, we start with that. We say, okay, so we got 90,000 contacts. And then we said, let's look at all the pages that these people are visiting. And our next task was separating out those SP products, since we're interested in the SP products buying group, separate out the URLs, which we know if they're interested in SP products, they will go to those URLs. That is, they will go to those web pages. So you begin to target that. And then we began to look at only these 3 dimensions. We were playing around a lot, but then we said simplicity dominates. If simple things can give you the answer, why go for complex things? So we just took these 3 dimensions for creating the cluster. One was total content consumed. How much content is being consumed by these visitors who are coming to the pages? And then we created 2 ratios. One was how much of that is in those SP pages, the SP pages versus total pages, okay? So that means if that ratio is high, that means most of their time is being spent on SP product pages, right? And then we said, okay, days spent on this content versus all the days that they're spending with us. So if you're looking at over the last 9 months, you want to see how many days have they spent on our site versus how many days of those was actually spent looking at SP specific product. So now you're beginning to zero in on those who are spending most of their time on that particular product line, so that then you can begin to say, oh, these contacts seem to be, at least seem to begin to belong to this SP buyer group. And and have that sort of thinking in place. And the basic hypothesis here is saying that for this group, any rise in total content consumption should also imply a rise in the SP to total URL ratio. That is, that ratio has to go up as the total content is going up. Otherwise, if the total content goes up and this ratio is not rising, that is the SP ratio is not rising, that means they are spending time somewhere else. They are not necessarily spending time on the SP specific content. And same for the days spent. Days spent is also important because it's possible that somebody shows a spiky behavior. That is, they look at a lot of pages over a 2-day period and then they disappear. Then all of a sudden, you'll say, oh, sure, my ratio looks good, but they didn't spend enough time and it's not showing enough meaningful interest. But just these 3 dimensions is enough. You don't need much more. And of course, I used the BayesiaLab tool for this, but also re-verified it using Python, etc. Since doing clustering is fairly straightforward, the results were remarkably similar within a couple of contacts. But the result that we got was quite straightforward. You see 4 groups that actually began to show up. The x-axis here is overall engagement, that is how engaged are they across the Cisco.com site. The y-axis is showing the amount of SP content that they are spending time on, right? Because ultimately you are trying to see total engagement and the SP specific engagement. So these are labels that we then put, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it was G1, G2, G3, G4, but in terms of understanding this, so we label the people who are at the left corner as casual because they were not spending enough time with us. Then the next group was bystanders. They were spending time, but they were not necessarily showing a lot of interest in any particular technology, definitely not in SP. So we sort of said, yeah, maybe they haven't made up their mind quite yet, but they're definitely not spending time on SP content. Then we had this very interesting group of high engagers. They were spending time on SP also, but they were spending time on a lot of other things as well. It just looked like they were high engagers. And that is another area of research that we need to dig into these high engagers separately. But there was this other cluster, what we call as the SP buyer, where the engagement was decent, but almost all of it was on that product specific content. So this group stood out separate. And so we began to call that as our first level of identification of SP buyers, that group seems to be showing some interest in SP specific products, and that we can now begin to dig into that and to see does that group begin to show some of the characteristics that we are interested in. So then, and I'm a very simple user of BayesiaLab, as I've told Stefan multiple times. We have had the product for 4 years, but I haven't gone deep enough yet. I had to attend more of Lionel's sessions to learn and go deeper. But having said that, the next thing we did actually, we created this very simple network. We were more keen to separate out the high engagers from the SP and to see, is it showing the kind of behavior that you would expect? And what you see with the high engagers was very interesting. You see the SP URL ratio, SP days engaged, good relationship. So that means they are spending time on SP pages and these two are related, but it's not related to the content, to the total content, to the total engagement. That is, and that was one of our hypotheses, that for a SP buyer group, you should see a relationship. For high engagers, what you're beginning to see is, yes, they're engaging very highly, but that is not pulling up this ratio. It's not pulling up the time spent on the SP page. So it was clear that these high engagers are spending a lot of time elsewhere, but not necessarily spending a meaningful amount of time on the SP page to show any meaningful relationship there. And on the other hand, if you dig into the SP buyers, not only do you see the relationship between the SP URL and SP days engaged ratio, but you also see that relationship with the total content, and you see that relationship happening. So then you begin to get a little bit of confidence. You say, maybe there is something. Maybe there is that this work has some meaning and some value. Then the next step that we took was, for the SP buyers, we actually dug in, and this is a bit of an eye chart, but we looked at all the content that they're consuming on those SP pages. How are they doing it, and what is the content that they are spending their time on? Now, this by itself is more interesting for those who start creating personalization journeys. That is, when they start spending time on this, they will look, for example, at the right in the middle, you see the data sheet, which is one of the top consumed things. So they are looking at those SP products, they're looking at the data sheet, which is really a very detailed document. Like, they're really spending a lot of time trying to understand the details of the product. But right around that data sheet, you see they're spending time with product bulletins, understanding end of life, spending time looking at the spec sheet, brochures, and so forth. When you start seeing that sort of behavior, that sort of cluster of activities, you start seeing that yes, they're not only are they spending time with the data sheet, but they're spending a lot of time with these other things almost at the same time. Then you know these are actually pretty serious folks. They are not your casual fly-by-night just coming to these pages and disappearing, but they are showing the kind of behavior that we have typically seen in those more serious about purchases, those who are more deeper into the space. Now, whether they're on a purchase journey or not, that's not the intent here. That's a completely separate project. But it shows that these contacts are valuable contacts. They are part of that whole SP buying group in that particular company. And we can break this down company by company, and we can get a pretty good sense for what it is that they're doing. So this is where we are right now in this overall journey. Already, the list of contacts that we have that we were able to generate from this, we of course were fortunately able to get it validated by the marketing teams who know some of them, and the sales members who know some of them. And so they are beginning to activate it already. In my book, I would say, well, let's wait more, let's do some more work, let's finalize it. But no, they have been so far pretty excited by what they have seen, and they are beginning to activate it. So what's beginning to happen is, obviously, our email campaigns. So we are beginning to streamline that, and this goes across the globe. There are multiple groups. So we are beginning to identify in our automation tools who are part of this SP buyers. Then, of course, it's affecting the whole marketing strategy as they're beginning to see the number of contacts that we can for sure identify. As I told you, there were 90,000 contacts. Only 2,500 showed up as SP buyers, right? So now that completely changes your approach. Earlier it was 90,000 spray and pray. Now it is only 2,500. It's a lot more targeted and a smaller number than everybody hopes, because everybody keeps hoping, hey, that every single customer is their customer, but they are not. And then, of course, it changes the event trade show engagement, because now when you are dealing with a somewhat smaller group of people, you can do many different things. You can have a lot more personalized journeys. You can have people attached to these people when they come to events, and walk them through the entire show. And then, of course, Cisco.com visitor personalization, that's somewhat obvious in that you have these contacts. Now you know that they are the SP buyers. So now all your advertisement on your site, all the content that you're showing will be for that particular product and for their areas of interest. So to wrap this up, where we are going with this, text specificity. So already we are down to SP products. However, even within SP products, there is another layer of differentiation. So we want to get to that. We want to get to that next layer of differentiation in these buying groups. We want to get to role specificity, which is, okay, so now you have identified SP buyers. Okay, you may get me to the next layer of technology. But who is the decision maker? Who is the legal person? Who is the influencer? And so forth. So that's sort of our next step there. Then, of course, using lookalike behavior, then we want to go to the anonymous. As I said, we have about 5.8 million cookies. So lots of visitors who actually come from these companies. They are large companies after all. So there's a lot of potential there, which we haven't exploited, and maybe increase the pool of people to whom we can market. And then the last part is the commitment. This actually we have made a lot of progress on, which is when you look at a buying group and you look at their purchase behavior, how ready are they to make a purchase? How far, what is a good time to attach a seller to them? What is a good timing on that? So there we have made some progress, and we'll continue to dig on that. So anyway, so these are some of our next steps on this. And with that, that's the end of my talk, and open to any questions. Thanks.